Welcome. The material we are exploring today is it's a case of just profound sadness and really significant legal complexity. We're going to be examining the events surrounding the murders of two young children, Yuna and Minu Jo, in Auckland, New Zealand.
And given the nature of this subject, it's important to state up front that we will be maintaining a very serious, objective tone throughout. Our focus is solely on the verifiable facts, the established timelines, and, the legal arguments that are presented in the sources we have.
Absolutely. And above all, we want to acknowledge the immense tragedy for the victims here, Yuna and Minu Jo, and of course for their extended family.
Our mission, really, for this analysis is to structure the complex chronology of this case. It's a timeline that stretches from that initial, very unsettling discovery in 2022, and it goes all the way back through the years of the mother's, Hakyung Lee's, mental deterioration.
Right, and then her flight from the country, her eventual extradition, and then that pivotal legal battle that really centered entirely on her state of mind.
Exactly. The court documents, in particular, give us a very rigorous pathway to follow.
So the public first became aware of this tragedy in August of 2022. And the moment itself was marked by a sort of chilling randomness.
It really was. I mean, the sources detail how the remains of these two children were discovered inside two suitcases in Clendon Park, Auckland.
And what's so heartbreaking about the start of this story is that the discovery was, well, it was completely accidental.
These poor children had been concealed for years, and they were only found because an unrelated family, acting in complete innocence, purchased the suitcases.
As part of a lot from a storage unit auction. Right?
Exactly, an auction for an abandoned unit. They had no idea what was inside.
The unit came from a facility called Safe Store Papatoetoe. So this family, they buy the goods, which included these old suitcases and other household items, and they just take them home.
It wasn't until they started sorting through everything, maybe even weeks later, that they noticed a strange smell, an overwhelming smell.
And that's when they opened one of the bags.
Yes. And imagine that moment. The sources say that upon opening the first suitcase, they found human remains. It was later identified as Minu Jo. They, of course, called the police immediately.
And the New Zealand police. They responded quickly and confirmed that this purchasing family was entirely unconnected to what happened.
Right. They were just the unfortunate people who stumbled upon this hidden crime scene. And clearing them so quickly allowed the investigation to focus backwards, away from the discoverers and toward the origin of those suitcases.
And that origin, the storage unit, that gave the police the initial devastating context for the timeline.
It did. Within weeks of the discovery, police made a preliminary statement. They said the children may have been dead and stored for up to 4 years.
4 years. That places the time of death somewhere around 2018.
And the fact that the remains were in a storage unit that eventually went up for auction, I mean, that implies missed payments.
Right.
Abandonment. It immediately suggested a very calculated effort to conceal the deaths.
The initial phase of the investigation must have been so difficult. I mean, just the identification process alone.
It was. And there were legal constraints. Due to the condition of the remains and the ongoing investigation, the children's names were suppressed for a long time.
It wasn't until over a year later, in September 2023, that Coroner Tanya Tititaha finally lifted that interim suppression.
And that's when they could be publicly identified as Yuna Jo and Minu Jo.
Let's focus for a moment on the details the sources give us about the children themselves, because it really helps us understand the loss here. Yuna Jo was born in September 2009. So at the time of her death, which was estimated to be mid-2018, she would have been about 8 years old.
And her younger brother, Minu Jo, was born in March 2012, which made him about 6. The sources also provide a really poignant, specific detail about Minu. He had a speech impediment, and it was caused by a cleft palate.
And that detail, it's not just a sad fact. It became a significant part of the defense's insanity argument at trial, didn't it?
It absolutely did. It tied into the mother's delusional beliefs.
And there's that other small, just heart-wrenching detail from the discovery itself.
Underwear.
Minu was found wearing underwear marked with the word Wednesday. Just a simple piece of clothing for a child learning the days of the week. It connects this horrific crime back to the mundane, everyday life of a family that existed before all this happened.
Absolutely. The names, the timeline, these small personal details, it shifted the entire scope of the police work. The focus moved squarely onto tracing the family's history, their movements around Papatoetoe, and of course, identifying the person responsible for abandoning them in that storage unit.
So to really understand the events that unfolded, we have to examine the background of the defendant, Hakyung Lee, the children's mother.
And it's noted in the sources that she was actually born Hakyung Lee. She legally changed her name later on.
Which is an action the Crown would eventually use to demonstrate a kind of calculating awareness, right?
Precisely. Lee's personal history, is marked by this early displacement and grief. She first migrated with her family from South Korea to New Zealand in 1993. She was just 13.
And a really significant destabilizing event happened in her youth. Her father died in 1998.
That's right. And the sources note she returned to South Korea for university studies at age 18, right after he passed away. So you can see she's experiencing major life transitions alongside this profound grief at a very young age.
She later comes back to New Zealand, though. She studied hospitality, and this is where she starts to build the life that would ultimately be just destroyed.
She met her future husband, Ian Joe, at a church. She was actually a Sunday school teacher there. They married in 2006.
And their marriage, it seems, established a pretty solid foundation for a while. They lived in an apartment first, then bought a house in West Auckland, and eventually settled in Papatoetoe in South Auckland.
And this period, from around 2006 until 2017, it appears to have been one of stability, of community integration.
And then the children were born, Yuna in 2009 and Minu in 2012. They attended Papatoetoe South School.
And this is where the accounts of their established normalcy are confirmed, which makes the eventual tragedy just so much harder to comprehend.
The sources introduced testimony from one of the children's teachers, a woman named Mary Robinson. And her testimony was, it was profoundly important during the trial.
It was. She described the children as exceptionally well-behaved. And crucially, she described both Lee and Ian Joe as caring parents who took an active interest in their kids' education.
So this wasn't a family that was marked by prior neglect or some obvious instability. The parents were engaged.
Exactly. That testimony, confirming the outward appearance of a loving, stable home, it was essential for the Crown. It helped them establish a baseline for the family unit before everything descended into chaos.
And Ian Joe worked as a supervisor at Auckland Airport, and Lee was a homestay mother, so she was bringing in some extra income.
They were functioning members of their community, rooted and attentive, right up until the unforeseen, catastrophic event of Ian Joe's illness and his death in 2017.
The sources are absolutely unequivocal on this point. The tragic turning point was the death of Ian Joe from cancer in November 2017.
Yes, this event was the catalyst for Hakyung Lee's complete mental collapse.
And the immediate reaction that's documented, it paints a picture of this intense, isolating grief.
She became profoundly grief-stricken. And, critically, she made the decision not to tell Yuna and Minu that their father had died.
She withheld that truth from them.
She did. And that plunged her into a spiral of isolation and suicidal ideation.
Her intent became clear very quickly, though. In the months right after Ian Joe's death, she told her own mother. She explicitly stated that she wanted herself and her children to die with her late husband.
And that early statement provided a crucial insight. It was the foundation of the mental state that the defense would later rely upon. This belief that death for the whole family was the only acceptable outcome.
Her actions in the months after that become particularly erratic, especially when you look at them through a financial lens.
Right, and this is where the Crown would later argue that this calculated, goal-directed behavior really conflicted with the defense's narrative of just complete, aimless madness.
So in December 2017, just weeks after her husband died, she took the children on a 2-month vacation to South Korea.
And this wasn't some, budget trip. The sources highlight she spent a staggering $32,000 on luxury hotels during that stay.
For a family that had just lost its main earner, that's an incredible amount of money.
It suggests either a complete disconnection from reality or access to a significant financial buffer, probably from insurance or estate assets.
And a forensic accountant, Andrew Yoon, later helped the Crown establish that this level of spending was a sudden, calculated change in her behavior.
And the luxury travel continued into 2018. In April, she took the children to the Hilton in Taupo. In May, they traveled overseas again, staying at the Hilton on the Gold Coast in Australia.
Then mid-June 2018, they were in Queenstown, New Zealand, again staying at a Hilton, visiting high-end restaurants.
Now, the defense framed these trips as desperate attempts to create happy memories before the end. But the Crown saw them as meticulously planned, conscious decisions.
This timeline is so critical because it establishes the final known window of the children's lives.
It is. Relatives testified they last saw Yuna and Minu on April 26, 2018. And then we have the digital evidence,
The PlayStation.
Yes, the PlayStation evidence. Forensic analysts later confirmed the children last logged into the game Minecraft and gained trophies on June 27, 2018.
And that electronic timestamp is the last objective, verifiable moment the court had to confirm that Yuna and Minu were still alive.
So, Lee killed the children shortly after that, around late June 2018. The defense didn't dispute the cause of death.
She served them juice mixed with the antidepressant drug nortriptyline.
And this wasn't a random substance. The sources confirmed Lee had been prescribed 60 of these tablets back in August 2017 for sleeping difficulties, so she had controlled access to a powerful pharmaceutical.
The fact that she used a prescribed controlled drug, that also feeds into the Crown's argument of calculated intent, doesn't it?
It does. However, because of the condition of the remains, pathologists couldn't definitively state if the drug alone caused their deaths or if it just incapacitated them and they were killed by other means.
But the consensus remained. She caused their deaths.
Yes. And after the killings, she carried out that final meticulous act of concealment. She wrapped the bodies, hid them inside the suitcases, and then drove them to the storage facility in Papatoetoe.
And she rented that unit specifically for this purpose.
Mm-hmm. And that act, renting the storage unit, it became one of the Crown's strongest pieces of evidence against the insanity defense. It just screamed logistical planning and concealment.
Lee's immediate actions after the killings were. They were characterized by these self-destructive impulses, but also intense efforts at erasure.
The sources confirm she did attempt suicide after killing her children, which aligns with her previously expressed suicidal ideation.
And while she later claimed regret, she consistently maintained that at the time, she believed she was doing the right thing, that she was rescuing her children from an unhappy, fatherless future.
And that's the very definition of the delusional belief the defense leveraged. However, her actions right after, they betray a very practical awareness of the wrongfulness of what she'd done.
First, driven by what she described as guilt and self-loathing, she changed her legal name from Hakyung Lee to Hakyung Lee.
And that name change? It's a bureaucratic action. It requires paperwork, intent. The Crown later framed it as a calculated attempt to avoid detection, to shed her criminal past.
And the physical flight was immediate and well-planned. In July 2018, just weeks after that last Minecraft login, she left New Zealand.
And crucially, she didn't just book some cheap last-minute economy flight. She booked a business-class ticket back to South Korea.
Which suggests access to funds and a desire for comfort and efficiency in her escape.
Exactly. In South Korea, she continued her efforts to, as the source put it, start a new life. She spent money on beauty treatments.
And while you could see that as a desperate attempt to create a new persona, the Crown viewed it as more evidence of conscious decision-making, resource allocation, not the behavior of someone totally disconnected from reality.
Her mental state, though, it was clearly still fragile in Korea. She sought treatment, was diagnosed with depression, and was prescribed medication, so the psychological distress was ongoing.
Then in 2021, her situation seems to have gotten worse. She entered a relationship with a man she met on an app, a connection she later described as traumatic, even alleging assault. So she certainly wasn't finding peace.
No. And all this time, the investigation in New Zealand was dormant, just waiting for that accidental discovery.
But the timeline picks up dramatically in South Korea in mid-June of 2022. Hakyung Lee's mother, Chun Jae-lee, learned her daughter had been admitted to a psychiatric ward.
So Chun Jae-lee travels to the hospital to visit her. And even while she's institutionalized, Hakyung Lee maintains her silence about the children. She doesn't confess, she doesn't reveal their location.
Instead, she focuses on practical needs. She asks her mother to buy her new contact lenses, new clothes, a new phone.
And that silence, coupled with the focus on material things, it just reinforced the prosecution's view that she was actively suppressing the truth, which indicates awareness.
Not long after her mother returned to New Zealand, the remains were discovered. That was August 11th, 2022.
And the police investigation quickly focused on the family. Given Lee's flight in 2018, New Zealand authorities mobilized an international investigation very quickly.
On September 15th, 2022, Hakyung Lee was located and arrested in Ulsan, South Korea.
The sources highlight that Korean police successfully tracked her through a combination of her medical records and her phone data. She was arrested on suspicion of crimes against humanity and faced 2 murder charges from New Zealand.
The extradition process was remarkably swift, which suggests a lot of cooperation between the two countries.
It was. In November 2022, the South Korean Minister of Justice approved the extradition. She was sent back on November 29.
And crucially, for the eventual prosecution, the South Korean authorities submitted, quote, significant pieces of evidence to New Zealand along with her.
Right. And that implies that the evidence gathered in Korea, medical records, phone data, financial trails, it was already building a very strong case for premeditation even before the trial in New Zealand began.
Upon her return, Lee made her first appearance at the Manukau District Court on November 30th, 2022. She was remanded in custody.
And the initial procedural steps, they moved fairly quickly. On December 14th, she entered a plea of not guilty to both murder charges.
The path to trial, though, was legally complex. There was a long battle over name suppression.
There was. But on July 19th, 2023, the New Zealand Court of Appeal rejected the defense's argument about extreme hardship and finally lifted the suppression. That's when she was publicly identified as Hakyung Lee.
And after some delays, the trial began on September 8, 2025 at the Auckland High Court.
Now, the sources make it absolutely clear this was not a trial about who committed the crime.
No. Both the Crown and the defense agreed. Hakyung Lee caused the deaths of Yoona and Minu Jo, and she concealed their bodies. The entire two-week trial hinged exclusively on one thing.
Her state of mind. Her state of mind at the moment the children died and whether she was legally culpable for her actions.
And this brings us to the core legal concept here. Legal insanity under New Zealand law.
Specifically, Section 23 of the Crimes Act 1961. And this is important. This section defines legal insanity as distinct from a general medical diagnosis of mental illness or depression.
So the defense had to prove two things. First, that she suffered from a disease of the mind that affected her reasoning.
And second, and this is the most critical part, that she did not know that her act was morally wrong at the time she did it.
Okay, so let's unpack the opening arguments because they really framed the central conflict for the jury. The Crown, led by Natalie Walker, opened by confirming the homicides were associated with that antidepressant drug, nortriptyline.
And their case was built on proving awareness and intent. Walker explicitly challenged the insanity claim by presenting all of the meticulous, goal-directed behavior Lee exhibited after the deaths.
The Crown argued that a person who is legally insane, who doesn't know right from wrong, wouldn't take such calculated steps to cover up their crime.
Exactly. They cited the actions we've discussed. Deliberately hiring a storage unit, methodically hiding the bodies, cleaning her rental property, changing her name, and buying that business-class flight to flee the country.
These, the Crown said, were not the actions of someone operating outside of rational thought. They were the actions of someone who knew they had committed a crime and was trying to escape.
Conversely, the defense, led by Lorraine Smith, argued forcefully for legal insanity. Smith painted this picture of Lee spiraling into intense grief and isolation after her husband's death.
Her belief system, according to the defense, had fractured to the point where she genuinely believed killing her children was an act of mercy.
Right, that she was saving them from an unhappy and parentless future. Smith argued that under Section 23, Lee lacked the moral awareness that what she was doing was wrong.
The testimony that followed really became the battlefield for these two narratives. The Crown brought in numerous witnesses to establish that normalcy before her husband's death and the calculation after.
The children's teacher, Mary Robertson, testified in tears. It was powerful. It emphasized the shocking contradiction between the caring mother she knew and the defendant in the dock.
And that financial evidence from the forensic accountant, Andrew Yoon, that must have been very effective for the Crown.
It was. Yoon confirmed that massive spending increase, the $32,000 trip, the luxury hotels, it all happened right after Ian Jo's death. The Crown argued this was not aimless spending, but a conscious decision to liquidate assets or spend insurance money in a calculated way before the end.
And the digital forensic analyst, Damien Govender, he confirmed that definitive date of the final Minecraft login.
June 27, 2018, yes. And that specific piece of data, it constrained the timeline of the murder. It reinforced the idea that the killings and the concealment were tightly linked in a short planned sequence.
But the ideological clash, it happened during the psychiatric testimony. You had two experts presenting fundamentally conflicting assessments.
It was the core of the trial. The defense relied heavily on psychiatrist Dr. Yvette Kelly. Dr. Kelly testified that Lee met the criteria for legal insanity. She affirmed that Lee suffered from a severe disease of the mind, made worse by her grief.
And her testimony focused on Lee's delusional beliefs, right?
Yes, her intense, fixed, delusional belief that she was somehow responsible for her husband's death and for her son Minu's cleft palate. These delusions, the defense argued, show that her thought processes were so far from reality that she genuinely believed she was acting correctly.
And the Crown's rebuttal.
It was systematic,
Yeah.
and it was highly focused on that legal threshold. They introduced forensic psychiatrist Eric Monasterio.
And Dr. Monasterio argued that Lee did not display the symptoms of severe psychotic disorders like schizophrenia.
Correct. His expert opinion was that her actions, the cleanup, the secrecy, the flight, all indicated that she retained a fundamental awareness that her actions were wrong, even if she was profoundly depressed and grieving.
So the difference is, it's subtle, but it's legally vital. Profound mental illness isn't the same as legal insanity.
That's precisely it. Dr. Monasterio argued her ability to plan, to book flights, to change her name, to get a storage unit. It all showed goal-directed behavior aimed at avoiding consequences. In his view, a person who truly doesn't know right from wrong wouldn't engage in such complex, calculated attempts at evasion.
The closing arguments really crystallized this tension. The defense attorney, Lorraine Smith, she reiterated Lee's history of instability, the previous suicide attempts.
And she pleaded with the jury to look past the logical post-homicide actions and focus on the sheer despair. She argued her mind was, quote, disconnected from reality when she decided to kill her children.
And the Crown, led by Natalie Walker, delivered a powerful counter-argument focused on what she called Hakyung Lee's several lies.
Walker detailed how Lee lied to her family about where the children were, lied to doctors, and consciously avoided confessing to police for over 4 years. That consistent use of deception, the Crown argued, was unassailable proof of her awareness of guilt. It demanded a murder conviction.
So the 2-week trial ended. The jury began deliberations on September 23, 2025. And the speed with which they reached a decision was, well, it was very indicative of their stance.
It was. After deliberating for only 3.5 hours, the jury returned a verdict of guilty.
Hakyung Lee was convicted on 2 counts of murder for the deaths of her children, Yuna and Minu Jo.
Justice Jeffrey Venning confirmed the verdict and remanded her into custody. Sentencing was scheduled for November 26, 2025.
And this conviction, it provides a really definitive summary point, doesn't it, in terms of interpreting Section 23 of the Crimes Act?
It does. By rejecting the insanity defense, the jury affirmed the Crown's position that Lee's post-homicide behaviors, the name change, the flight, the elaborate lies, were overwhelmingly persuasive evidence.
Her calculated actions demonstrated that she possessed sufficient awareness of the wrongfulness of her acts, even if she was suffering from severe mental illness.
Exactly. The legal system prioritized objective evidence of calculating conscious concealment over subjective claims of a delusional belief structure.
And that distinction, that prioritization of logistical proof over the psychological reality of suffering, it leads us to our final thought. Given this compelling conflict, where the defense presented expert evidence that Lee's belief system rendered her genuinely disconnected from reality, yet the Crown succeeded by pointing to simple acts like booking a flight and renting a storage unit. We have to consider where that legal line between intense grief-fueled mental illness and full criminal responsibility truly rests in these complex cases.
I mean, what is the appropriate balance between mental state and actionable intent under the law?
It forces you to reflect on the immense weight that's placed on a jury to differentiate between profound psychological distress and a legal inability to discern right from wrong.
And the outcome of this trial suggests that, in New Zealand at least, evidence of premeditated evasion is a very difficult hurdle for the insanity defense to overcome.
We have completed our exploration of the materials provided, tracing this devastating timeline from the accidental discovery of Yuna and Minu Jo's remains all the way to the legal conclusion of Hakyung Lee's murder conviction. We encourage you to reflect on the detailed evidence presented, particularly that crucial distinction between mental illness and the legal definition of insanity.
Analyzing the synthesis of information in a case that involves such deep personal tragedy, it really highlights the necessity of remaining focused on the established legal and factual timelines and just allowing the facts to speak for themselves.
Thanks for listening.